Okay, so Warcry Red Harvest Terrain. So I've got my glue, got my clippers, got my mould line remover. I have got the terrain cards, and I'm just going to use them as a reference because with the first core set for Warcry, there was a few errors in the way the instructions told you to build the terrain there. So it's telling you to glue a few pieces which you shouldn't have glued. Now I don't know of any issues currently right now, but I'm just going to use it as a brief reference as I go through this, just to make sure we don't make any mistakes. Right, okay, so we're starting with some of these kind of Veramite flows. So we've got this sprue here. I don't tend to worry too much about mould lines when I'm doing terrain. So we'll see how we get on with this one. Okay, that's the first piece done. Very straightforward. Right, these are all really simple and they are pretty much identically built. So I'm going to bash the rest of these out and then we'll move on to the next bit. It's worth noting that these feet here they all look pretty much identical. They are interchangeable. You just need to be careful about the way that you're orienting the actual lava flow itself, because when they're laid out, I've got a feeling that some of these ones with the longer feet, if they're put in the wrong area, they could potentially clash with others. You know, if you've got one like that and then one like that, you can see the feet clash. So just be careful on that. Other than that, 3 of the feet are largely identical. Also be careful when you're actually clipping these off of the sprue, because these kind of, these pieces here, the part where it's connected to the sprue is right along the edge here. And it's not exactly easy to see it when it's on there, but there's a chance that you could chop off a little part of the scenery as well. So just take a little bit of care when you're cutting them off the sprue, so as you don't actually damage the scenery as well. Right, so here's the next interconnecting piece. There's no major trouble with it or anything like that, but it does, again, another highlight of making sure that you put the feet on, especially the feet that's kind of got the larger piece of terrain on it. If we were to look at 2 pieces where they kind of join to make a kind of a corner, if you had those larger pieces in there, this wouldn't line up properly because they'd be clashing against each other. So for the smaller parts, it's not so important, but for these larger bits, with the bit on the base, the skeleton one on that one, make sure you put it where it tells you supposed to, because otherwise you could be, you know, creating future problems during gameplay. Okay, so we're 2 sprues out of 7 down. We've already amassed quite a chunk of terrain as it is. So that's 12 small pieces already. So let's get cracking with the rest of it. So just for reference, in terms of in amongst building that lot and obviously recording and all that kind of stuff, that took me around about 40 minutes. So not too bad. Right, okay, so let's move on to this section here. So this section is the sprues that have got the platforms on them. Right, the next section is a fairly large section. Now, this is more complex than anything you've built before from this box. It's not particularly difficult, but what it does have is it has a lot of individual structural elements. So the main thing on this really is just to take your time and work your way through it pretty slowly. Now, there are things like some of these long strut parts which go in between. Make sure you always get that round the right way. If you do it upside down, none of the other struts around it will fit properly. Now after that, you've got a choice to make. You can either make a ladder like this, or two ladders like that. You can do 2 big ladders, 4 small ladders, or you could do what I'm going to do, which I'm going to build a couple of sets of ladders so I can have both, best of both worlds. Next decision you've got is what ladders to make. So you can either make a long ladder or 2 short ladders. So there's one on each, there's 2 sprues the same. So I'm choosing to do 1 long and 2 short, but you can do 4 short. You can get creative with magnets or whatever you want, or you can do what I'm going to do, this, and later on start getting creative with some of your leftover sprue and build your own ladders. The only other thing to note about the ladders is don't glue them to anything. So these remain separate for you to connect and use as you want throughout your games. The next final section for this sprue is to clip off these big chunky walkways. Okay, so this is the next major piece to construct. Now, it was actually so big I can't even get it in frame. Now, we'll go through everything at the end, but what I would say is that as awesome as this piece of terrain is, and it is beautiful, there's some really dumb design gone into it. So, for example, this part here along the floor, which lays on the bottom, that is connected very, very small piece of plastic on there. And again, and it goes upward through this chain. Now, this is something I've noticed in a few different terrain pieces from Games Workshop recently. There was some similar sort of stuff in the Octarius box. Now, this whole thing, if you look at from the bottom there, you've got all of the strength and stability is on one side and on the other. There's nothing going between. And this doesn't make a huge difference. You know, it's still stable and that kind of thing. It just means that it's not up to much kind of, it's not too robust. So what I'll be doing, and I'll probably have it done by the time I do the review for this box, is I will be creating like a hardboard base just for this piece and potentially the next piece. So the next piece that I'm putting together, I've done most of it, haven't run into any trouble yet, but it's this large piece, the largest piece of terrain in the box. Right, okay, so that was a disaster for me, really. That took far longer and had more problems than I anticipated. But we got through it. So let's finish building this up, and then we'll take a look at all of the terrain in one go. We finally got it done. That was really a pain in the arse, to be honest. Very difficult to get these buckets on, for me at least. What I think I should have done originally is just dry fit the whole thing and then just glued just onto the sprue and the edges there on both sides. I think that would have made it easier, but it was a pain. But I almost didn't know when it was done, but then you got some pieces down the bottom that kind of link up the square. So if they fit correctly and you've got a correct fit at the top, you know you're done. But yeah, that was a pain. Right, okay, so a quick assembly of this lot. And have a look, there's actually nothing to, there's only 1 or 2 bits to assemble here. I believe actually only 1 piece. 2 pieces. So we've got to glue some skeletons to one of the stakes, and we've got one of these sets of stakes that is on a corner wall. So that's it. So I'll put these together, then we'll take a look. Okay, so that's everything assembled. So let's quickly go through each individual terrain piece and just give my thoughts on the assembly of it. So this is all of the parts that where the Veramite travels down. They are easy to assemble, no problems. Again, on some pieces, you may need to shave away a tiny bit because there's a little bit of play in there. They're all simple. Don't forget to orient the kind of knobbly terrain bit sticking out the bottom in the correct way, so as when you're making corners and that kind of thing, you don't have pieces that clash. But yeah, all in all, straightforward. 12 pieces in total. We notice that 4 of the pieces are on a slightly higher level, and that relates to this main piece, the biggest piece of terrain in the lot, and we'll go through why in a few minutes. Next up, we've got the terrain that was in the original Warcry core box. So this sprue featured in there. So we have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sections of stakes. One of them is a corner piece and one of them is a very small piece, but we've seen all these before. They are cool. There was no assembly required except for the corner piece and to stick a few skeletons onto some of the stakes. Next up, we have got these 2 identical dual leveled pieces of terrain. Now I like these a lot. They are really cool. They come with 2 sections of walkways. In fact, let's set it up like that. It's cool, and they also come with some ladders. So again, you have the options. You can create 2 large ladders, 4 short ladders, or 2 short and 1 long. We've got this very large piece here, which is really cool. Again, I have issues with how structurally intact it is. So you can see that that's not going to take a lot of damage. So I am going to base this. I'll just do a small base just with some hardboard and Mod Podge. But yeah, perhaps I'll do a video on that. But yeah, it's a cool piece of terrain. There is one movable part. That is this part here. You can take that off and then move it down to the lower section. Now you can see that just when I am pushing that on, you can see that whole flimsy piece of terrain just getting ready to move just from that. So that's why I'm gonna base it, just to give it some extra stability, because it is not only weak here, but it is very weak here as well. And just by toughening this up, it's going to help. Then our final piece, the piece which was a real pain in the ass to put together, is this one. Everything's fairly simple. It was somewhat difficult to get the skeletons onto this turning wheel, not too bad. And I will say that there was an error in the assembly as well. So one of these skeletons was in a different position in the rule book, or sorry, the part numbers were different in the rule book for this skeleton here and this strut here. The reason you need to get it right is if he goes there, he then gets in the way of this skeleton. So when you see it, I think it's part D30 and 31. You just need to swap those over so as it fits correctly. But it is a very cool piece, and this has also got our second piece of movable terrain on here as well. So this section here where the Veramite comes down, so it comes up through these buckets, comes through and then down into here. This section comes off, and you can have it at 2 different heights, which links up to our higher sections there. So that's it. So that's all of the terrain. It was pretty fun to build. I actually prefer building terrain more than building models. But yeah, it was pretty good to put together. No major problems. Connecting the 2 sides of those with those buckets in the middle, that I have to admit was fairly challenging. But you know, that's the thing with building these. Sometimes I read about great difficulty that people had putting some models together, and when I just breezed through it and never knew that there could even be an issue with it. Whereas other times I get things like that, and many of you will be putting that together and thinking, what the hell was he doing wrong? But that is it for now. I'll be doing another video where I'll be assembling our 2 warbands, and what I'll be doing is I'll be looking through all of the cards and start building them in a way that I think is going to give us our best possible warbands out of the miniatures available. So I will come back to you with that soon, and then I'm going to play the game for a week or 2, and come back with a full review of the box. Early indication for what I've seen already, having looked through the rule book, having built the terrain, is that it's a great addition to Warcry. So I'm sure that when my review does come out, it will likely be positive. So there you go, guys. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. Much appreciated. Any comments on that, leave them down there. I check the comments all the time and I always respond. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you very soon. Take care.